Good evening, everyone. This is Saints.Walterpicks here. We're going to talk about some start sits for Week 11. So we've got an electric schedule this weekend, I think, especially the Thursday night game. I feel like the Thursday night games lately have not been all that great, but I like divisional matchups. It's always a little bit more entertaining when we get some of those, especially the Jets and Patriots with Travion Henderson finally getting up to par, I feel like, as an RB1, returning some of that preseason value a lot of us hope for. So if anyone has any start sit questions, drop them in the comments, and we'll just be talking through some of the games. So you got one here. Should I trade Jags Washington for DK? Honestly, I would stick with Washington. Travis Hunter has officially been ruled out for the entire season. BTJ's also dealing with an injury. He might miss time here and there. He missed this last week, and he's seeming like the most reliable target for Trevor Lawrence at the moment, especially in the red zone. He got 2 touchdowns last week. His usage as a return man as well. That's where he got one of his touchdowns last week. So I would stick with Washington. I feel like he has a little bit more upside with the Jaguars than probably DK Metcalf does. Start Judkins or Henderson. This is a good one, man. So Henderson's is a little tricky for me because, like I was saying earlier, he's kind of popping up into that RB1 role that a lot of us hoped he would get to. And I think the Jets matchup is a pretty good one for him. I do like Judkins, especially down the stretch. And it is a good divisional matchup. But honestly, I like Henderson's upside. I think what I would say is if you're in a safe spot where you're probably likely to win, I would go with Judkins. I think he has a safer floor. But the upside Henderson showed last week for me is enough to want to start him if you just need points. Getting 2 huge breakaway touchdowns last week is incredible. And you can't really get that type of value out of a lot of players. Do you think Mahomes and Rice are safe to start this week? I do, and there's a couple of reasons why. One, it's a divisional game, and I know that the Broncos defense obviously is one of the best in the league. I think they're number 1 at least points allowed to wide receivers this year, but divisional game makes that matter just a little bit less. You got to think about the fact that teams prepare for their divisional rivals every single year, twice a year. So every other opponent that they play, the schedule comes out, they're not playing every other team every year. But every single year, they know for a fact they're going to be playing those division rivals. And so they prepare a little bit better for those teams. On top of that, Passer Tain is still out. He's still on IR. So I do expect the passing game to be flowing a little bit on that Chiefs side, especially with Rashee Rice, who's undoubtedly the best receiver on that team. So I would certainly start Mahomes and Rashee Rice this week. Pick 2, Wandale, Diggs, or Sutton. So I'm probably going to go with Sutton. I do think that honestly, the Broncos probably play from behind most of this game, or at least within 1 score if they are ahead. So I think that they'll be passing quite a bit. And Sutton, I think, is the most talented receiver on that team at the moment. And so I think he'll get a nice handful of targets. And the other one, I'd probably go with Diggs, to be honest. I know it's a little odd. It's a Thursday night game, but I don't really trust Wandale at the moment. They fired Brian Daboll, and with Jackson Dart out, I think it's a little bit risky just for me to want to start Giants players. He might have the upside with Jameis Winston, obviously, who we've seen go into these teams and throw for a couple hundred yards and a couple touchdowns a game. And that certainly could happen with Wandale, but I think that the risk is a little bit too high for me personally. I like to play it safer when I make start-sit decisions on my roster. I'd rather go with the security of some of the other guys. But, you know, if he goes out for 25 points because Jameis Winston's there, it's honestly not going to shock me too much. But Odunze or Devontae? I feel like I got to go Devontae. Right now, Matt Stafford is having an MVP caliber season. Before the season started, I was a little bit cautious on both Devontae and Puka and how much they were going to take away from each other, but they've both been incredible this year when they've both been playing. And when Puka was out, Devontae filled in quite nicely. So I think I go with Devontae. Odunze is another guy that kind of like some of the others we talked about has high upside, but I like Devontae Adams better just because Odunze has had some of those bust games this year. He's had a handful, and then obviously a 0-point game not that long ago. I don't think we're ever going to get a game where Devontae Adams is scoring less than 10 points, especially this week. It's a good divisional matchup versus the Seahawks. I think it's going to be a lot of passing from both sides, and I could very easily see Devontae Adams getting, 6-7 catches and a touchdown and, 80 yards on top of that. Is Michael Wilson startable? I think so, and maybe a flex spot in like a 12-man or more league. This offense obviously is much better in the passing game with Jacoby Brissett than it was with Kyler Murray. Brissett has been the QB 10 since taking over as a starter in the few weeks that he has been, which is incredible. I think Trey McBride is obviously going to see the biggest increase in targets, but I certainly would think Michael Wilson is startable. And MHA going out was obviously kind of unexpected, I think, for a lot of us today. But Michael Wilson, I think, is going to be a decent player. I wouldn't put him into my wide receiver 1 role or anything, but I think he's a solid flex play. Judkins, Sutton, Parker, Washington, DK, start 1 for flex, half PPR. This is interesting. I'd probably go Parker, Washington. The half PPR is a little bit interesting. So I haven't done a half PPR league myself. Obviously, I know that means half a point per catch, but Judkins, he doesn't get a lot of work in the receiving game, so I don't think that affects him too much. I think he's going to have a good game this week, but honestly, that Ravens defense has been better since Lamar's been back. And I know Lamar's supposed to be out this week again. And so I think there's a little bit of inconsistency with that Ravens team, but it is divisional. They will be playing a little bit better. I do like Sutton a fair bit, and I'm okay with DK, but Parker Washington for me is a guy that I love right now, and I have the last couple of weeks. For those of you who follow me on TikTok, I told you guys to pick him up a couple weeks ago, right when Travis Hunter's injury did pop up. So he's one of my favorites right now, and I think probably for the rest of the season, he will be worth a start most weeks. With Travis Hunter being out all year, we don't really know what kind of role Jacoby Myers is going to have yet, but I don't think it's going to eclipse Parker Washington. So that's what I would go with. Trade Smitty for Henry. That's an interesting one. So Smitty has kind of, I think, established himself as the wide receiver one, at least in terms of a fantasy perspective for that Eagles team. Certainly more consistent than AJ Brown has been. So I do like him, especially as we get closer to the end of the season and the Eagles need to win every game because they are going to be competing for that number one seed for the NFC. Henry's been a little boomer bust this year. Lamar being unhealthy scares me a little bit. So I would say if you really need a running back, it's probably worth the trade for Henry. But otherwise, I would stick with Smitty. He's been very, very good the last couple of weeks. Only a couple of bad games. I think Henry has a lot more volatility with his performances. Sell Olave, honestly, I don't know if I would, man. Tyler Shock has been a little bit better than I expected whenever they announced he was going to take over. I was a pretty big Spencer Rattler fan, just, from a fantasy perspective. I thought he was doing good getting guys like Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave the ball for as untalented as that team seems to be right now. But he's been playing very well. Chris Olave did good last week. I don't think you're probably going to sell him for more than his value's worth. So I would probably stick with Chris Olave unless you can get an absolute steal in return. Start Aaron Rodgers or Nix. I might be leaning Aaron Rodgers this week. Bo Nix I like. He had a 3-4 week stretch where he was just smashing it, like top 3 quarterback over the stretch of the 3-4 weeks. But last week obviously wasn't that good. It's another divisional matchup. I think it's going to be competitive, but I don't know if Bo Nix is going to be the one getting a lot of points. I don't know if he's going to be passing the touchdowns as much as maybe Dobbins or RJ Harvey runs him in. I think Aaron Rodgers, we saw what he did earlier this season against the Bengals. I think Aaron Rodgers is honestly probably a little bit of a safer start, especially with Joe Flacco being there, who's just airing the ball out like crazy. I think that Aaron Rodgers probably passes for quite a bit this weekend. Bijan for Devontae, Aaron Jones, and Jalen Warren. I just got sent this. I'm assuming you mean give up Bijan and you get in return Devontae, Aaron Jones, and Jalen Warren. I'm a little bit wary about that. I know Bijan's coming off a couple of kind of lackluster games, but I really don't think his value's tanking at all for me. He's still the RB5 in points per game, and I think that they're going to get him involved more in the red zone going forward. I don't think it's bad value in return. I do like Devontae. He's a very consistent, solid guy. I think Jalen Warren's got a decent playoff schedule who I like. And then Aaron Jones has been good as well this last week, but he's a little bit injury prone to me and a little bit also kind of boomer bust. I would probably stick with Bijan unless you just desperately need the depth. See, start 3, Trey, Chase Brown, Judkins, Woody. Do you mean Trey Tucker or Trey McBride? If it's Trey McBride, obviously him. If it's Trey Tucker, I would probably go Chase Brown, Judkins, and Trey, and whether it's Tucker or McBride. I don't like Woody at the moment, honestly. And I know it's against a weak Titans team, but it's a divisional game, as I kind of talked about earlier. There's a lot of divisional games this weekend, and that is a factor at play for a lot of these players. So I was pretty big on him a couple weeks ago, but he's just not putting up the numbers that I kind of thought he would, taking over as that RB1 for the team. It seemed like Nick Chubb is still getting enough volume to keep him a little bit limited. Trade Barkley Jones for Adams and Dowdle. Honestly, I like keeping Barkley right now, man. He's got such a good playoff schedule. I know he had kind of a rough start of the year, but if you look at his difficulty of schedule, his first 10 games are the toughest he's had all year, and then the last half is all easy, which is kind of nice. It's very front weighted. So I like keeping Barkley right now, but getting Adams and Dowdle isn't bad. Dowdle's coming off his first game, not scoring 28 or more points since he's been the RB1, and I like Adams too. So if that's a Barkley, Aaron Jones for Adams and Dowdle, I would probably say stick with Barkley and Jones unless Jones is currently a starter, in which case maybe go for that Adams Dowdle just because you can get kind of a somewhat of a lateral move from Barkley to Dowdle, but then Adams is obviously an upgrade at the wide receiver position. Hey, would you trade Jordan Mason for Trey Benson? At this point, yeah, I would, man. It's looking like Trey Benson is kind of climbing up in stock right now. Once he returns, I think he's going to be pretty good. Like I kind of talked about earlier, Jacoby Brissett has only elevated this offense. It's taken over Kyler Murray's place, which I like. And so I think Trey Benson gets some usage out of that, even if it is more so in the passing game. That opens up the run game for guys like Trey Benson to maybe get a couple more yards per carry. And Jordan Mason at this point, I was kind of high on him preseason, thinking that he might take over, and he certainly did for a little while. But now that Aaron Jones is back and he is getting a substantial amount of the carries there, unless he goes out again, which we just can't ever predict, I think it's probably worth trading away Jordan Mason for Trey Benson. Trey Tucker or Tez Johnson? This week, I probably like Tez Johnson. I know that Emeka Egbuka's back, and he is incredible. I know he kind of had a little bit of a mid-season dip, but he's back. But I still like Tez Johnson. I think they're going to be passing the ball quite a bit this week against the Bills, who I think are one of the better offenses in the league. I think it'll be close, somewhat high-scoring. And Trey Tucker, I just don't really know what to think about that Raiders offense. Tyler Lockett was the go-to guy last week, and I could see it happening again against a weak Cowboys defense. So Trey Tucker, for me, feels like he needs to be on the bench until he kind of takes over in terms of volume as that RB or as that wide receiver one for the Raiders. So I would go with Tez Johnson. Loveland or Mason Taylor? This is a good one too. So Loveland's in a divisional matchup against the Vikings. Obviously did not do that great in week 1 when they played the Vikings the first time. I think they'll get him more involved this time. Mason Taylor has kind of been a little inconsistent for me. He kind of had some hype after the first few weeks of the season. I would probably go Loveland. I think the upside is higher, and I think they probably have a very similar floor at the moment. So I would go with Loveland. They're both divisional matchups. I think that the Bears are better now than they were in week 1. I think Ben Johnson's figured out how to use those offensive weapons a little bit better. So I would go with Loveland over Mason Taylor. Let's see, Tyler Lockett or Calvin Austin. This is a good one, man. So I think that both are liable to get a lot of targets this week, to be honest. I might would go with that's close. I might would go with Calvin Austin. I think he's just a little bit safer. That Raiders offense just scares me. I'll be honest. It's a little bit too inconsistent for me. Ashton Genty obviously has been a very big piece of that offense. He's been very good since week 4. I know he had a rough start, but he gets some usage in the passing game as well. Tyler Lockett, obviously he's coming off a great game, but like I just mentioned with Trey Tucker, I don't feel like we know enough about that offense to be able to trust one player over another at the moment. And I feel like Calvin Austin is a pretty reliable number 2 for the Steelers. Obviously doesn't have great weeks every week, but I think this week in a matchup against the Bengals, he will be pretty good. So I'm going to go Calvin Austin over Tyler Lockett. But I will say as well, for anyone asking start-sit questions in the chat, for those of you who haven't already, download the Walter-Picks app. They have a start-sit tool, and the projections on that tool are more accurate than ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo, and CBS. You're going to get a more accurate answer on who should start and who should leave on the bench on the Walter-Picks app than you will on the apps that you and I both play on. So definitely check that out. Click the link in the bio for a free trial and use code EH whenever you sign up. Get a free trial and unlimited access to all the tools. So definitely check that out before we get into week 11 to make some of these critical start-sit decisions a little bit easier for you. Diggs or Franklin? So I talked about Diggs a little bit earlier. I think he has a decent week against the Jets. It's divisional. I do expect this to be a little bit closer of a game than people are maybe expecting. I know the Patriots are one of the better teams in the NFL right now, and the Jets are probably bottom 3. But it's divisional, and it's Thursday night, who we've seen kind of be snooze fests lately. That being said, I am going to go Troy Franklin. For me, it's another one of those divisional matchups that I feel like they're going to have to spread the ball around. I think they're going to have to go to some of their better players like Sutton and Franklin more so than maybe some of their other guys. And generally, as a rule of thumb, I like to take Sunday players over Thursday night players because Thursday night games, kind of just historic over the last couple of years, have kind of been snooze fests. It doesn't give the guys enough time to rest and prepare for it as much so as some of the Sunday games. So I would go with Troy Franklin over Diggs. Let's see, prefer Booty or Alec Pierce for rest of the season? Honestly, I'm going to go Alec Pierce. So the Colts have an incredible playoff schedule, and that's the biggest thing for me that I'm talking about when I speak about rest of the season, because at this point in the season, it's time to start prepping for playoffs if you have not already. So Alec Pierce showed what he could do against a great pass defense this last week against the Falcons, and then he's got a slate of really good matchups when it comes to the actual fantasy playoffs. So I think Alec Pierce might have a couple of down weeks upcoming just because the Colts do have a couple of tough games. But I think when it's time to, rubber meets road and it's time for the playoffs, I think Alec Pierce is going to be much more impactful for your team than probably Booty will. See, Breece or ETN? This is another good one, man. I kind of am pretty low on Breece right now, and I'm not sure if that's a shared sentiment among people, but I feel like the Jets making the trades they did, shipping off their best defensive players, kind of indicated to me that they're packing it in for the season. They're loading up on picks, which probably isn't the wrong idea, but I don't see guys like Breece and Garrett Wilson and some of their other top players really wanting to play as hard as they can at the moment. Maybe not so much as they did at the beginning of the season. And he had a touchdown this last week, but that was on one big play. If you look outside of that, he really didn't score all that well. ETN has been pretty reliable in the passing game lately, especially with the injuries to BTJ and Travis Hunter. I think ETN's probably a safer start this week. He's got a decent matchup against the Chargers defense, who have been pretty good. The defensive coordinator has made very good work of the injured defense, but I still think that the Jaguars and Travis Etienne specifically does enough this weekend to get you a decent score. Should I start Marks or Tetaroa? I'm going to go with Tetaroa. I just like the upside there. I talked about Woody Marks a little bit earlier. He's just not taking over that Texans backfield as much as a lot of us hoped he would, myself included. I thought he was going to be a little bit more impactful, but He's just not. Nick Chubb's getting too many carries. And I think Tet, although he's coming off a couple of, maybe lackluster games, I think against the Falcons, where it's a divisional matchup, the passing attack may not matter as much in terms of the defensive side from the Falcons. I think Tet could have a pretty solid game. So I would go with Tet. See, start 2, McMillan, Chase Brown, or Jones Sr. So I'm going to go Chase Brown for sure. He did great. He averaged, I want to say it was 9.8 yards per carry when I looked earlier. Maybe it was 9.6 against the Steelers last time. And he's been very good the last couple of weeks coming off the bye. So I'm definitely going to get Chase Brown for my other one. Honestly, I'm probably going to go Aaron Jones, man. That Bears run defense has been a little bit subpar this year. And last week he did great. I think that he's kind of back to that RB1 role now that he's fully healthy again. And I just talked about Millen. I like the upside, but I don't like his floor. I like him better than Woody Marks, but probably not more than a guy like Aaron Jones. Lockett or Franklin? So I'll talk about this one a little bit earlier. It's a good question. I'm going to go with Franklin. I kind of talked about Lockett earlier. I think he's probably the best option of that Raiders team if you are starting a wide receiver at the moment, but I still don't trust that offense enough to really want to start a lot of their wide receivers over some other ones. And I think Troy Franklin in a divisional matchup this week, I think gets a decent amount of targets along with Cortland Sutton. Let's see. Pick 2, Pickens, Devonta Smith, or Henry. This week, I'm going to go with Devonta Smith. I like Devonta Smith against the Lions, and I like Pickens against the Raiders. Henry scares me a little bit with Lamar Jackson potentially being out again this week. That obviously has a big factor in it in terms of how efficient that offense can be. So Henry scares me a little bit. I think the safe answer right now is Pickens or Smith, but Henry could make his way up there if that team ends up being a little healthier than we're expecting. But the Browns' run defense has been very, very good this year, so that's the other factor to consider as well. Diggs or JMO this week? I'm going to go JMO, man. It's a good matchup against the Eagles, who have been somewhat weak against the pass attack this year. And with Dan Campbell taking over play calling for that Lions team, I think that everyone, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Amon-Ra, JMO, Sam Laporta, I think they all get elevated a little step from Dan Campbell stepping into the play caller. We saw last week what they did against the Commanders, and I think we're going to see more of that for the rest of the year. So I like JMO, man. I like him this week, and I like him the rest of the season. Jennings or Metcalf? I'm going to go with Jennings for this week, assuming he's healthy and plays. I know he's been kind of off and on all year. I'm assuming he's going to play. He's looking like he's supposed to. But I like Jennings this week, man. It's a divisional matchup against the Cardinals. So I think he's going to get a nice handful of targets. And Metcalf has been good a couple games this year, but for me, just not as consistent as Juwan Jennings has been whenever he's played. Let's see, pick 2, Henderson, Rachaad White, Breece Hall. I'm going to go with Henderson and probably Rachaad White. I know he's losing some volume in terms of the run game to Sean Tucker, but the Bills' run defense has been very weak this year. So I think even on a limited carry basis, I think Rachaad White does a lot in the run game. But he also is the guy in that backfield that gets the receiving work over Sean Tucker. So I do like Rachaad White. I feel like Henderson doesn't need much of an explanation. He's coming off of his breakout game of the season. And the week before wasn't bad, honestly, either. But there's a less of a split backfield, and I think we're going to see more of the same this week. Breece Hall scares me a little bit, playing a tough defense. Outside of that big touchdown run last week, he didn't really do all that much. So Breece Hall's a little bit scary for me at the moment. Tej Johnson or Franklin? This is another good one, man. I like this Bucs passing attack against the Bills. I like the offense as a whole, really, for the Buccaneers right now. So I do like Tej Johnson. I'd probably go him over Troy Franklin. I think they're in very similar circumstances this week, being that they're the second option for their team. But I think that just because of the matchup, Bills defense is a little worse than the Chiefs defense has been this year, although it's divisional for the Chiefs and the Broncos. I think I would go with Tej Johnson over Franklin. See, pick 2 running backs and 1 flex, Swift, Henry, Henderson, and McMillan. I'm going to go with Swift and Henderson for my 2 RBs. And then my flex spot is a little bit tricky. So Henry, I would say is safer than McMillan. They're in a tough matchup, and Lamar might not play. So that could factor in as well. If Lamar ends up not playing, then I might go Tut McMillan just because we've seen how much this offense struggles without Lamar being there, even when the rest of the pieces are healthy. But assuming Lamar plays, I'm absolutely going to go Henry over McMillan in my flex spot. Trade away Judkins and Pickens for Javonte and Alec Pierce, half PPR. Trade away Judkins and Pickens for Javonte and Alec Pierce. I don't know if I love that, to be honest. I think Judkins is a great playoff schedule. Javonte's isn't bad, but it's not quite as good as Judkins. And Pickens and Alec Pierce, I think, honestly, have very similar rest of season rankings for me. Maybe Pickens is a little bit higher, but Alec Pierce is very, very good right now, and he does have an easier playoff schedule. So I might would stick with Judkins and Pickens because I like Judkins a little bit better when it comes to the playoffs. And Pickens and Pierce are pretty similar for me. Pierce does have an easier playoff schedule, but I think Pickens does get more volume. So I think it'll net somewhat even. So I would say with Judkins and Pickens. Trade Bucky and Nico for Rice. Honestly, I don't hate that at the moment with Bucky Irving's injury. It's not looking like he's really going to be back this year for any substantial amount of time. So I don't hate at all trading away Bucky. Nico's been very good as well, especially with Davis Mills throwing in the ball. He just relies on his safer targets like Nico Collins more. But even if Stroud comes back, he'll be fine. But Rossi Rice is definitely the better receiver. And with Bucky potentially not even playing, I certainly don't hate that trade. Derrick Henry or Chase Brown? I'm going to go Chase Brown. I talked about it earlier, but last time they played the Steelers, Chase Brown, it was either 9.6 or 9.8 yards per carry he had. And he also gets some work in the receiving game. He's one of the better receiving backs in the league. And Derrick Henry's in a tough matchup, and Lamar might not play, which both scares me a little bit. So I'm going Chase Brown over Derrick Henry this week. Sutton, Allen, Wandale, Worthy. Start one. I'm assuming you mean Keenan Allen, Wandale, Worthy. Let's see. Sutton. I don't hate Keenan Allen's matchup this week. Wandale scares me a little bit just because James Winston's taken over. Could be good, could be bad. We don't know. Jackson Dart has been pretty good this year. And then Brian Dable getting fired. I know Mike Kafka's taken over. And, I think that the consensus is that Mike Kafka is going to be a little bit better than maybe Brian Dable was. But it's still a coaching change, which scares me a little bit. So I'm going with Sutton. I think that even though it's a divisional matchup against a tough opponent, I think Sutton's going to be a little bit safer in terms of targets this week. So that's what I'm going with. Mbuka or Tez and Mason or Henry. Definitely Mbuka over Tez. He seems to have reclaimed his throne as the wide receiver one for that team and as a top 10 wide receiver for the rest of the season. And between Mason and Harvey, I'm definitely going to go with RG Harvey. Mason's tapering off in terms of his workload, and Harvey doesn't seem like he quite so much is. He's been getting worked in as the season's gone on, and Mason kind of peaked whenever Aaron Jones initially went out with his injury, and he's kind of just slowly declined since then. So I think Harvey is going to have a little bit higher of a floor. Tyler Lockett, Romeo Doubs, or Michael Wilson, PPR flex. Honestly, I'm going to take the upside on Michael Wilson, man, with Marvin Harrison Jr. going out and with a pretty good matchup this week against the 49ers, which is divisional. I think it's going to be high passing on both sides. I like Michael Wilson, man. Should I trade Gibbs? I'm not recommending anyone trade Gibbs. He does have a tough playoff schedule, but Dan Campbell taking over that play calling definitely makes me trust Gibbs a little bit more. If you can get more value for him than he's worth, like if you can get a Jonathan Taylor for him, sure, but I don't think you're probably going to. So I'm not recommending anyone trade away Gibbs at this point. Franklin or Judy? I'm going to go with Franklin this week. I don't love Judy's matchup. I know it's the Ravens, it's divisional. The Ravens defense hasn't been all that great this year, but Judy hasn't been consistent enough for me this year. And as much as Troy Franklin has been a little bit boomer bust as well, especially lately, he has been a consistent receiver for that Broncos team. So I'm going with him. Pick 2, Rachaad White, Javonte Williams, or Jalen Warren. Also, should I trade Garrett Wilson? If you can trade away Garrett Wilson, then you need to, absolutely. The injuries he's dealing with, I think, are liable to keep him out for a significant piece of the rest of the year. I just don't trust him at this point. That Jets team as a whole, obviously, with the trading away their best players a couple of weeks ago before the deadline, I think the Jets team has kind of packed it in and called it a season. So I'm definitely looking to trade away Garrett Wilson if I can. Between Rachaad White, Javonte, and Jalen Warren this week, I'm going with Javonte. And I'm going with Jalen Warren. I think both have pretty good matchups this week, and I think they'll both get a lot of volume. Rachaad White, I don't hate as well, but he is splitting with Sean Tucker, so that's the only reason he's a little bit behind for me. Kittle or Bowers? I love both matchups this week. They're both top 5 for me. I'm personally going to go with Brock Bowers. That Cowboys team has been extremely weak to the passing attack this year. And I know Bowers had a bad game last week, but it was Thursday night. It was divisional. There's a lot of things you can chalk that up to, but I think Bowers has a great week this week. Jake Ferguson or Cade Otton? I'm going with Jake Ferguson, man. I know that he's obviously lost a little bit of volume since CD's come back, but I think he's still one of the best tight ends in the league, and I still think he's going to command a number of targets for that team. And as much as Cade Otton has been pretty good the last couple of weeks as well, I think Jake Ferguson is in probably equally as good of a situation, but I think it's just a better tight end and has a better matchup this week, so that's who I would go with. Devontae Adams or George Pickens? It's got to be Devontae Adams. I do like George Pickens this week and the rest of the year, but Devontae Adams has been so safe all year, whether Puka's there or not, and he's got a great matchup this week. I know the Seahawks passing defense is good, and they don't allow as many points to wide receivers as maybe some other teams, but it's divisional, so that's not going to quite matter as much because the Rams are going to come in well prepared. When you got a guy like Sean McVay as head coach, you come prepared for some of those tougher defensive matchups. So I think Devontae Adams is a safe start this week. Stafford or Mayfield? This is a good one. I'm going with Stafford right now, man. He's been one of the elite fantasy quarterbacks this year, which is kind of surprising to myself and a lot of people in the preseason. I know he's got great receivers, but that Rams offense is is just firing on all cylinders, playing as much high-octane offense as they can. And I know Kyron Williams is getting some work as well, but that offense is arguably the best in the league at the moment. Maybe behind the Bengals and maybe behind the Cowboys, but they've been incredible, and Stafford specifically has been. Virtually no turnovers. He's only had 2 all year compared to the 21 touchdowns. So I'm going with Stafford this week. Half PPR, pick one: Jennings, Pitts, Slayton, Parker, Washington. I'm going to go with Jennings as my first pick. I don't mind Pitts. I'm not going with Slayton really at the moment just because of the coaching change and the quarterback change in New York. It scares me a little bit. And I do like Parker Washington, but I feel like he's more of a yards guy than a volume guy, whereas Juwan Jennings is a little bit better of a yards guy, than a volume guy. And so I feel like in the half PPR format, Juwan Jennings is liable to get you a few more points than maybe Parker Washington will this week. McBride for Kittle, Sutton, and Hampton. Are you getting Kittle, Sutton, and Hampton? If so, then I would. I do like McBride right now, especially with the Marvin Harrison Jr. injury. But Kittle is going to be an elite tight end for the rest of the year. Hampton, especially when he comes back, is going to take over that RB1 and that Chargers team that does have a really good run attack, just with Harbaugh as head coach. And I like Sutton. He's got a good playoff schedule, and I know he's had a couple of bad games, but he's been solid most of the year. So if you're giving up McBride for all three of those, then I would say it's absolutely a good trade. Mooney or Trey Tucker? Oh, man, this is a tough one. The Falcons did not do good against the Panthers last time. I think it's going to be much, much better for the Falcons this week than it was when they played the Panthers the first time. Darnell Mooney's commanded a decent amount of volume from Michael Penix. I would probably go him over Trey Tucker, to be honest. This Raiders offense, I know they're playing a weak passing attack, and I could see this being the game for Trey Tucker to establish himself as the wide receiver one, but we just haven't seen it yet, and so I don't want to bet on it. It just may not happen this year. Pete Carroll and Geno Smith have not been as good as a lot of people thought they were going to be whenever they both moved over to Las Vegas this year. So it's unfortunate, but it is what it is, man. I'm going Darnell Mooney. Schultz, Hunter Henry, or Fanning Jr.? I got to go Schultz, man. He's been incredible the last couple of weeks, especially with Davis Mills. Whenever backup quarterbacks get in, they tend to favor tight ends and number one receivers. And that's exactly what we've seen these last couple of weeks with Davis Mills throwing the ball to Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz. So I'm going with Schultz over the other two. Michael Wilson or Trey Tucker? I'm taking Michael Wilson. I kind of just spoke about Trey Tucker, but I think Michael Wilson has a lot of upside with Marvin Harrison Jr. being out this week and potentially for the rest of the year. We don't quite know yet. I know it was an appendix-related surgery. I don't think we know yet what type of surgery it was and what the recovery time is. So he's definitely liable to miss some extended time, possibly even the rest of the year, especially if his recovery point is the last week. Then there's probably no point in bringing him back for one game fresh after a surgery. So I would go Michael Wilson. Jordan Addison or Michael Wilson? That's a good one as well. I would still probably go Michael Wilson, man. I do like Jordan Addison for the rest of the year. He's got a great playoff schedule and a great rest of season schedule. But last week, I think we saw that even with a good matchup, that J.J. McCarthy just may not be ready to do it consistently yet. And I think Jacoby Brissett certainly can. So I think Michael Wilson's a safer play. But Jordan Addison certainly has some upside this week. It's a good divisional matchup. And we saw what the Vikings did to the Bears last time coming back. So Jacoby Brissett, I do think is a good start this week. He's been the QB 10 since taking over the last couple of weeks over Kyler Murray. So I do like Jacoby Brissett. It's a good divisional matchup. I know Marvin Harrison Jr. is out, so that hurts him a little bit. But Trey McBride is going to step up. I think Michael Wilson steps up a little bit, and I think there's still a good passing offense. And I think Jacoby Brissett's going to be the captain of that. Judkins, Chase Brown, or Henderson, Mark Andrews, or Theo Johnson? I'm going Mark Andrews just because we don't quite know yet what the Giants' offense is going to look like with Daboll being gone and with Jackson Dart being out. So I think Mark Andrews, as much as he has not been great all year, I think he's a little bit safer. And between Judkins, Chase Brown, and Henderson, this week I'm going Chase Brown just because of how good he did last time against the Steelers. And he's been very good the last couple of weeks. So I like Chase Brown for the rest of the year. He's got a good playoff schedule, and I think this is a good game for him as well. Who is a good RB I can get for Rome/Waddle? If you're packaging them together, I would expect an RB1 of high caliber because those are the two very, very good wide receivers right now. Not quite top 5 or top 10 maybe, but they're both very good. If you're trading one away, I would say try to get a guy like a Travis Etienne, maybe he's a little bit on that kind of like mid-tier RB2 end where I think maybe Rome or Waddle sit at the moment. If you're trading both of them together, then you would have to get a top-tier guy like a Christian McCaffrey, a Bijan Robinson, or a Jonathan Taylor to make that worth it, trading away 2 starting high-caliber players for 1. Start Henderson over Dowdle or Javonte. That's a good one, man. I would probably just leave in Dowdle and Javonte. I mean, I'm a big Henderson guy right now, especially coming off a huge game last week, but it is only one game so far, and Dowdle and Javonte have been doing it for a lot longer this season. So I think Dowdle and Javonte is probably a little bit safer this week. And then if Henderson can do it again this week, then maybe we'll start putting him every single week over some of these other top tier guys next week. But especially it being a Thursday night matchup where I do think Henderson is liable to go off. I think his boom and bust probability are both a little bit inflated with it being a Thursday night game. So I would stick with Dowdle and Javonte. Pick 2, Debo, Keenan, Franklin, Tez, and JMO. I certainly got to go JMO. I kind of talked about it earlier, but Dan Campbell taking over that offensive play calling, I think elevates every single player on that offense, and we saw it last week with JMO. Dan Campbell is eager to get him involved, so I certainly would go JMO this week. It's another good matchup against the Eagles, who are pretty weak against the passing attack this year. They have allowed the 10th most points to wide receiver, so I like JMO. And for number 2, I almost want to say Debo. Even with the injuries to that team, Debo has been a solid guy all year. He gets work in the running and the receiving game, so I like Debo. Henderson or Harvey? I'm going to go Henderson in this case. I've kind of said a lot of positive and negative for Henderson, but Harvey being the RB2 and it is a tough defensive matchup, I think Henderson's going to be a little bit safer for you this week. I think they both have a pretty high boom bust probability this week, but I think Henderson's a little bit higher up on his floor for me. I give up Rome for ETN. My backup wide receivers are Waddle, Wandale, Tez, Addison, Worthy, and Parker Washington. Honestly, I don't know if I would, man. I do like Waddle. I think Wandale's got some potential with Jameis being there, but a lot of the other guys like Tez, Addison, Worthy, and Parker Washington, I don't know if they're going to be solid every single week players. And so predicting which one of those guys is going to be the best one out of a lot, I don't know if is worth it. And Rome is good, man. I like Rome over most of those other guys besides probably Waddle. I would say it's probably worth it if ETN is going to be a substantial upgrade to your running back position, but otherwise I would stick with Rome. Zach Charbonnet or Tajay Spears this week? I'm going with Zach Charbonnet, man. He's top 5 in red zone touches for running backs and goal line carries for running backs. He's just getting too much red zone usage for me to not start most weeks, especially for Tajay Spears, who's similarly splitting backfield reps with Tony Pollard, but I don't think has quite as secure of a floor because he's not getting the red zone touches necessarily over Tony Pollard. So I would go with Zach Charbonnet this week. What's going to do is Zay Flowers and A.J. Brown. I would probably be looking to trade them away. I don't think you're honestly probably going to get all that much at the moment, especially for A.J. Brown, who's been extremely boomer bust this week. Zay's been a little bit more consistent, but I don't really know what kind of guys you're going to get for him. But they're not 2 guys that I would want on my playoff squad. I want guys that I'm going in with that I know are going to be consistent and pretty secure to get me a nice floor of points and have a very, very low chance of busting any of those 3 weeks during the playoffs. And I feel like Zay Flowers and A.J. Brown don't fall into that category. So I would be looking to trade them both away. Trade London and Kyron Williams for Pickens, Breece, and Mbuka. I do like Pickens. I don't like Breece. And I do like Mbuka, but I probably like London more. I would say that's a tough one, man. I do like the splitting up of London to get Pickens and Mbuka. I definitely think it's an upgrade at wide receiver in net, but I think Kyron to Breece is a downgrade, man. I don't like Breece quite as much the rest of the year. But yeah, I think I would still take that trade, man. I think getting Pickens and Mbuka, who both have top 10 upside, is probably worth it. Breece isn't going to be a complete bust the rest of the year, but I don't see him returning as much value as a Kyron Williams is. But I think that the wide receiver upgrade to getting 2 guys at that level is probably worth the trade. Higgins or Adams at my flex. I'm going to go with T. Higgins this week, man. They got a great matchup against the Steelers, who allow the most points to wide receivers in the entire NFL right now. So I'm going with Higgins for sure. One thing I will say as well, for all of you guys who have start-sit questions, and if you haven't already, go to your app store and download the Walter-Picks app. They get more accurate projections than ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo, and CBS. And they have a start-sit tool, a trade analyzer tool, a trade finder tool, all that can help you improve your squad and help you make week-to-week start-sit decisions. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. It's what helped me win both of my fantasy leagues last year. So definitely check that out for any start-sits you guys have. You can get it for free right now as well, free trial if you use code EH whenever you sign up. And there is a link in the bio in the description as well that you can click to get to that app and get the free trial. So definitely check that out. Aaron Jones for ETN or RJ Harvey? Aaron Jones or ETN or RJ Harvey. Excuse me, flex PPR. I like ETN this week, man. I know the Chargers defense has been pretty good this year, but I think that with the BTJ injury, with the Travis Hunter injury being out for the full year, I think that I like ETN a pretty good amount the rest of this year. So I'm going to go with ETN over Aaron Jones and RJ Harvey. What defense this week? Dolphins against Commanders, Steelers against Bengals, Lions against Eagles, Jags against Chargers, or Bears against Minnesota. Open to other recommendations. I do like the Dolphins against the Commanders. I don't like the Steelers against the Bengals. I don't love the Lions against the Eagles. I don't love the Jags against the Chargers. I do like the Bears against Minnesota. For me, I think it's between Dolphins and the Bears, as much as that might seem odd because they probably are the worst two defenses of that mix, but they just have tougher matchups, or they have easier matchups, than the rest of them. So for me, it would be between the Dolphins and the Bears, and I would probably lean with the Bears just because I think their defense is a little better, and I think the matchups are probably equal in terms of strength. So I would go with Bears out of that mix. Start Algier or Tracy. Honestly, I'm going to go with Tyler Algier, man. I know Tyron Tracy maybe got himself back to RB1 reps last week, but I don't know if that's going to be consistent, especially with the new head coach and with Jameis Winston being there. We're not sure quite yet what the Giants offense is going to look like. We saw last week Tyler Algier get an absolute mother load of red zone touches, getting both touchdowns on the ground for the Falcons. So I think Tyler Algier honestly might not be a bad start, even with Bijan still being there. I think that they run the ball enough that they can both be decent a lot of weeks, especially for the rest of the year. Franklin, Doubs, or Jamison at flex? I'm going Jamison for sure. Dan Campbell taking over as that offensive play caller, man, that does wonders for Jamison specifically. I think it's the biggest upgrade, but everyone on that team. We saw last week how much Dan Campbell wanted to get everyone involved, especially Jamo, who I feel like he knew wasn't getting involved enough this year as much as a guy like him should be. So I think Jamison Williams is going to be very, very good the rest of the year, and I would definitely start him over a lot of other guys. Traded Troy Franklin and Michael Wilson for ETN. I don't think that's a horrible deal. I mean, Michael Wilson is kind of those are both kind of like high-end waiver wire pickups. I think, maybe picked up in the last couple of weeks. And I think ETN's a really solid starting running back this year. So I think for sure he's worth getting the 2-for-1 trade for. Marks for JMO, good trade. If you're getting JMO, absolutely, man. I kind of just talked about him, but I think he's going to be very good the rest of the year. Woody ROS or flip? I would try to flip him, man. I just don't trust him right now enough in that offense with Nick Chubb still being there and getting a decent amount of carries. I would probably try to flip him. Someone just mentioned him or Jamison Williams. That's a guy you can go get for him, then I absolutely would do so. Pick one to sit: Dowdle, Williams, Swift, and Hall. That's a good team, man. I would probably go with Swift or maybe Breece Hall. I think it maybe depends on the health of the Bears backfield this week, but I definitely want to keep Williams and Dowdle starting, and then between Swift and Hall, for me, it's a little close. I don't like Hall playing a Thursday night game, and he's playing a tough team in the Patriots, but with Swift, I don't know what his carry situation is going to be like. I know he's been battling an injury the last couple of weeks, but if he's fully healthy, I would certainly go him over Hall and leave Hall on the bench. Sutton and Jamison for London and Myers. I would probably stick with Sutton and Jamison over London and Myers, to be honest. I'm not sure Myers is really going to be returning much value. I think it could be a little bit better of a situation in Jacksonville than it was in Las Vegas, but I don't want to bet on it yet. We haven't seen it yet, and he hasn't been good all year. So I think having Sutton and Jamison is probably better than having London. And when I think Myers is probably going to spend most of his time on your bench, I think it's probably worth taking with Sutton and Jamison at the moment. Trade targets are vital. It's tough to give any answers because I feel like everyone at this point knows that Omarion Hampton is set to return here in the next couple of weeks and knows that Vital is going to be relegated back to an RB2 role, not really getting many starts and many carries. So I would say if you can get any player that's going to be starting beyond week 13 for him consistently in your lineup, it's probably worth trading him for. But if you need help finding specific players, one thing you could do, I talked about the Walter Picks app earlier, if you're not already on it, but it has a trade finder tool as well that can help you buy and sell specific players. So you could go in there, sync your league, and then go to your squad and click sell player and Vital. And what it's going to do is it's going to go through your opponent's rosters and package together good trades for you to offer your league mates. So that would be my recommendation, because the other thing too is whenever it comes to recommending trades, it's tough to give you a good perfect answer without knowing who your opponent's rosters are, right? Because it's got to be someone who needs the position and has depth otherwise to give up. So I would definitely recommend checking that out to help you out with that. Good flex option if trading RJ Harvey and Brock Bowers. I would say, Brock Bowers is a high-end tight end right now, so I think you could probably get a pretty high-end flex player. I think you could probably get a guy like Cortland Sutton maybe for him, who's been a pretty solid guy most of the year. Oh, let's see. This is a good one, man. Stafford versus Flacco. I think both are liable to have really good games this week, but I'm going to go with Stafford just because I trust him a little bit more than I trust Joe Flacco. And it might seem odd, but I just like it a little more. I think both probably do have good games. I think they're both inside the top 10 quarterbacks this week, but I think I've got Stafford one spot above Flacco. Trade Bucky for Pickens. My other RBs are JT and A-Chain. Absolutely trade Bucky for Pickens. We don't know if Bucky's actually going to end up returning at all this year. It's looking like he might just be out for the rest of the year with that injury, man. And if he does return, it's not going to be and maybe a substantial role that's going to be a factor when it comes to week-to-week fantasy football points. So I would trade it for Pickens, especially when you've got probably two of the top 3 running backs in the league right now in fantasy with Jonathan Taylor and A-Chain. Trade Bijan for Rice. Have London and Egbuka. My RBs are Javonte, Dowdle, and Henderson. Man, you've got a good squad. I would say probably so. If you want that good of a receiver, I think it's pretty good value trading Bijan for Rice. And if you've got London, it's always tough to want to double up having a running back and wide receiver on the same team. So I don't mind at all trading Bijan for Rice. And London and Buga are great too. I think it's going to be a really solid squad for you and a really solid flex play as well. Do you think Hendo takes over with Mondria? I think so. I think we saw it last week with what he did. A couple of really big runs. And it's a Thursday night game. So, I don't know if maybe this week is going to be a huge week, but I definitely do think Travion is going to be the RB1 for that team going forward. Huge Saints fan here, unfortunately. Just got Hampton and Odunze for Trev Henderson and Jawan Jennings in a trade. What do you think? I think long-term, you probably win. I do like Hampton still better than Travion, even though he's coming off a big game. We saw Hampton do it for several weeks before he went out with his injury, and I think he's going to return and provide that same value. And Odunze I probably like comparably, but probably a little better than Jawan Jennings. So I do think you got the good end of that deal. I know maybe for the next couple of weeks while Hampton's still out, you might be losing a few points having someone else in instead of a Henderson. But I think long-term, as long as you're good to make the playoffs, I think Hampton's going to work out for you a little bit better. Should I start Diggs or Marks? Half PPR. Man, I would go Diggs. I just don't love Woody Marks right now, man. I just don't like that the amount of volume that Nick Chubb is still getting for me is what scares me. Unless he's getting a touchdown, it really doesn't feel like he's returning much value. Against the Jaguars, he only had 60 yards. He had a couple catches as well, but that wasn't great. The week before, 27 yards. Week before, 60 yards. So I'm really not starting Woody Marks much at the moment. Unless he reasserts himself as an RB1 for that Houston Texans offense, I'm leaving him on my bench. Dart or Stafford this week? Well, I'm going to say Stafford for sure because Dart has been ruled out. The Giants have said that they are starting Jameis Winston this week, and it's unfortunate. I have Dart as well, so I am sympathizing with you, not Braxton. But unfortunately, he's not going to be in this week, and it'll be Jameis Winston, so I would go with Stafford. QJ Sutton or Travion at flex? I would probably go with Sutton, man. I like Travion, but it's a Thursday night game, which scares me a little bit. And I kind of want to see him do it more than one time before I start considering him a reliable, consistent, every week starting running back. So I'm going to go with Sutton. I don't hate QJ either, but that Chargers team is one of those guys that just spreads the ball around a little bit too much for me to want to start people outside of Ladd McConkey every single week over other guys that I feel like are a little bit safer. Gadsden, Fannin, or Theo rest of the season and week 11. I'm going to go Gadsden for both if he is healthy and plays. He's dealing with some a bruised quadricep at the moment, but if he ends up playing and doesn't miss time, I certainly think he's the best rest of the season and for week 11. But if he's out, I'm going to go with Harold Fannin over Theo Johnson just because that Giants offense firing Dable and Jackson Dart being out, I'm not quite sure what that Giants offense is going to look like. So I'm going to go with Fannin, who I think it's a little bit safer this year. Let's see. James Cook or Chase Brown. Now, this is a pretty good one, too. I think both have pretty good matchups this week. James Cook has been good for most of the year, certainly more so than Chase Brown has, but I really like Chase Brown's matchup. I talked about it earlier, but he, last time against the Steelers, it was either 9.6 or 9.8 yards per carry he was getting. And he obviously is good for a couple of catches every game as well, especially with Joe Flacco being there now. So I'd probably go with Chase Brown, but I do like James Cook as well. I think it's a good matchup against the Buccaneers. I think he's also due for a few catches and a pretty nice floor with the rushes and yards. So I don't mind either one. I think they're both probably worth starting this week, but I would go Chase Brown if it's between those two purely. Schultz or Pitts? I'm going to go with Schultz, man. I do like Pitts, but I think Schultz has been a little bit safer lately with Davis Mills being there. He's just favored Schultz and Nico Collins a little bit more than some of the other guys on the team. So I'm going to go with Dalton Schultz for this week. Demont or Worthy? I am going to go with Worthy this week, man. I love Demont, especially with the upgrade at play calling that the Lions got, but I think that it's going to be a tough run game. It's going to be tough being efficient on the ground for the Lions, and I think they're going to be much more effective in the passing game. So I don't know if Demont has a ton of value this week compared to maybe some other guys. And I think Worthy's liable to get a decent amount of balls this week with the tough matchup against the Broncos. I think they're going to have to spread it around a little bit more than maybe they have been the last couple of weeks with Rossi Rice being back. So I think Worthy's good for a couple of rushes and probably a couple of catches as well. AJ Brown and Mbuka for Mbuka and Ferguson. Absolutely, you got to go get Mbuka and Ferguson if you're giving up AJ Brown. That is absolutely a win for you. Flex, Troy Franklin, Odunze, Rashad White, Tej Johnson, or Aaron Jones. Those are not a bunch of not bad options, honestly. Between those guys, though, I'm probably going to go with Odunze. I like the matchup against the Vikings. I think that he's going to have to get a lot of targets if the Bears want to win this one. They didn't win last time against the Vikings. I think they want to get revenge this week, and I think Odunze is going to have to be a big part of that offense to make that happen. Start Ferguson or Bowers. I'm going to go with Bowers this week. They're playing each other, which is nice, but the Cowboys' pass defense is just worse than the Raiders at the moment. They allow far more points than they through the air. So I got to go with Brock Bowers. I know he's coming off a bad game, but I've got to go with Brock Bowers this week. Johnston or Addison? This week I'm going to go with Addison. He didn't play their first time against the Bears, but J.J. McCarthy in the fourth quarter turned it on and scored 4 touchdowns. And I got to imagine if anything like that happens again, it's going to be Addison. Johnston's just a little bit scary for me with as much as the Chargers spread that ball around. I'm not sure how much volume is going to go to him versus the other guy. So I would go with Addison this week. DK Debo or Parker Washington? I'm going with Parker Washington, man. I've been a very big fan of his the last couple of weeks. If you follow me on TikTok, I said to pick him up a couple weeks ago, and he's been paying dividends the last 2 weeks, putting up back-to-back 17-point games. So I really like him. I don't mind DK this week, and I don't mind Debo either, but I feel like Parker Washington is a little bit more secure, a little bit safer of a floor, if you will. Lamar or Stafford, I need consistency. If you need consistency, then it's got to be Stafford, man. Lamar's just been banged up and dealing with injuries this year, and Stafford's obviously been fully healthy. In the preseason, he was dealing with a back injury, but that is seeming to be nowhere to be found. Stafford has been incredible this year, 21 touchdowns to only 2 turnovers. I think Stafford, even if Lamar was healthy, there'd be a conversation to be had. It would still probably be Lamar, but it would at least be a conversation. But with him being hurt, it's certainly got to be Stafford at the moment. Trade J.K. Dobbins for Gadsden. I don't mind that at all. If you need a tight end, then I would absolutely say it's worth going to get Gadsden, who's been elite since taking over as a tight end one for that Chargers team. I'm a really big Gadsden, man. I picked him up at every league, even though I had a Trey McBride and a Jake Ferguson already. I thought he was worth the pickup. He's one of those guys that I think is worth even starting in flex positions over some of the other running backs and wide receivers. So I certainly would, if you are fine at the running back position, I would go get Gadsden. Pick 2, 10-man, full PPR, Tet, QJ, Woody Marks, Trey Tucker. I'm going to go with Tet, and I'm going to go with QJ, man. Woody Marks I talked about a lot earlier. I just don't trust him right now with as much of a volume as Nick Chubb is getting. And Trey Tucker, I just need to see him be the wide receiver one for that team before I want to start, betting on him or anything. So I'm going with Tet, and I'm going with QJ this week. Rodgers or Mariota? Dart's looking doubtful. Yeah, so I saw a report earlier that they have officially announced that Jameis Winston will be starting next week for the Giants. So, yeah, Dart is going to be out, unfortunately. I like Rodgers this week, man. He's got a great matchup. He threw 4 touchdowns earlier this season against the Bengals. I don't see why he can't do it again. So, I'm going with Rodgers over Mariota this week. Otten or Christian Watson PPR? I'm going to go with Otten, to be honest, man. That Packers offense has just been a little bit too back and forth for me this year. They spread the ball around too much, I think, for any one wide receiver to be startable every week. Otten has been very good the last couple of weeks, especially with the injuries to guys like Chris Godwin and guys like Mike Evans. And they're having to lean on some of their other guys like K-Dot. And I think it's probably worth a start over Christian Watson. So you trade away Amon-Ra St. Brown for Saquon, A.J. Brown, and R.J. Harvey, or Aaron Jones. My current RB is/was Dobbins. I also have Benson coming back, and my wide receivers are Ladd, Sutton, Olave, and T. I don't love buying A.J. Brown right now, but I do like buying Saquon. I think that you're definitely weaker at the RB position than you are the running back position, though. So I probably would make that trade and go get Saquon, who I think is going to be incredible come playoff time. He's got a really, really good playoff schedule, so I think that's not a bad trade at all. Josh Allen or Drake May? I got to go Josh Allen for sure. Drake May obviously has been incredible this year, but Josh Allen just gets more red zone touches. He's gotten a lot of rushing touchdowns this year. And I think that a big factor of it as well is that the Bucks Bills game is going to be more competitive, and so Josh Allen will have to be being utilized more than maybe a Drake May will be against the Jets. I think they could get up early and just on the clock out. And the other aspect is that Drake May is playing on Thursday night, which is fun to watch, but it's not very good for the fantasy scores oftentimes. They end up being snooze fests, unfortunately, more so than they end up being, high scoring classics. So, unfortunately, I don't see a huge week for Drake May. I do like Josh Allen though this week. Jake Ferguson or Brock Bowers, I need consistency. Well, Jake Ferguson certainly has been more consistent this year, but Brock Bowers certainly has more upside. So if you need consistency, I would say Jake Ferguson. But I always hesitate to say anything against Brock Bowers just because he is so good, and we've seen what he can do at his ceiling, putting up 40 and 50-point weeks. Do I drop RJ Harvey? I have CMC, Judkins, and Marks. I would probably keep Harvey over Marks, to be honest. He's looking like he's going to be a little bit more maybe consistent with the points and receptions for the rest of this year. Should I flex Wan'Dale Robinson or Michael Wilson? I'm going with Michael Wilson personally. I know Wan'Dale has a pretty high ceiling with Jameis Winston playing this week, but the quarterback change and the head coaching change both scare me a little bit. I think that we're just a little bit uncertain of what that New York Giants offense might look like this week. And so I'm a little bit cautious on starting guys like Darius Slayton and guys like Wan'Dale Robinson. We know what Jacoby Brissett's been doing this year with the Cardinals. He's been the QB 10 since taking over, so he has been very effective in the passing game. And obviously with Marvin Harrison Jr.'s injury and him being ruled out, I think Michael Wilson is a solid start. Let's see. Jets Trey Tucker Marv for Rome Genti Debo. I'd probably make that trade, especially with the Marv injury. We don't really know, or surgery, I should say. It's not even really an injury. I guess it kind of is, but I think Rome Genti and Debo are going to be a little bit better for you down the stretch than maybe a Trey Tucker and Marv will. Let's see. Herbert, Goff, or Mariota this week. Between those guys, I probably got to go Herbert, man. He just has the rushing upside that I think Goff doesn't have, and Mariota is just not as good of an offense with all the injuries they're having right now. So I'm going to go with Herbie. Let's see. Should I trade Jettas for Saquon? My RBs are Swift and Jacobs. I also have Vital and RJ Harvey on my bench. I have Rashi and JMO if I let go of Jettas. I think it's you're probably okay either way. Honestly, I think they both have great playoff schedules. I don't think your RB group or your running back group is particularly better or worse than the other one. They both are not bad, but they could be better. I like Rashi and JMO right now, and I do like Swift and Jacobs, but I like Saquon, man. I think he's got a great playoff schedule. Honestly, I don't have much stock in Vital long term, just because when Amari and Hampton comes back, he is going to take back over as the RB1 for that team. So Vital, I don't think yields as much depth as maybe it might seem. If we're just looking at Jettas for Saquon one-on-one, I'd probably go with Saquon just because I like the offense better a little bit. So I would probably trade away Jettas for Saquon. Garrett Wilson drop, and who should I get? I always hesitate to say drop because he might play a couple weeks here or there through the rest of the season. So I probably wouldn't recommend dropping him unless you're in a really small, shallow league where the waiver wire does have really good players. But if you're anything in like a 10 or 12 man or above, then I think it's worth keeping him on the bench just because if he does play, he's going to be better than most of the waiver wire pickups that you would get in his place. Should I drop Ricky P? I'm going to kind of just mimic the same thing I said a minute ago about Garrett Wilson. Whenever he's been playing this year, he's been incredible. And obviously now that the team is getting a little bit healthier, guys like Jawan Jennings and Kittle are back. Ayuk is maybe going to return at some point in the next couple of weeks. I'm a little less hesitant with dropping him, but I don't know, man. He's just so good when he's playing that it's hard for me to say yes on dropping Ricky P. But yeah, I mean, he's been out for a while now. I think what has he been since week 4 that he hasn't played. It definitely hurts his value a little bit. It's looking like he returned to practice. He's finally healthy and good chance to play on Sunday. So I would keep him. It's looking like he's gearing up to play this Sunday. So go for Burrow, drop Flacco or D Jones or Jackson Dart. Man, you've got pretty good QBs. I think you're probably good with Daniel Jones and Jackson Dart. Obviously, when they're playing, Daniel Jones is on bye this week. Jackson Dart is out this week, so you're probably going to have to play Flacco. I would maybe pick up Burrow after this week, drop Flacco for him, and keep Daniel Jones and Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart is the best answer if he's playing. Daniel Jones is not far behind him whenever he's not on bye. So if Jackson Dart ends up being out for an extended period of time, Jones will be fine in his spot. But then Burrow, when he comes back for the playoffs, could be a league winner. We don't quite know yet. I do like Jackson Dart or Daniel Jones, though, so I'm not sure how much better Burrow might be than either of those two guys. Chase Brown or Cortland Sutton? I'm going to Chase Brown this week for sure. He was very good against the Steelers earlier this year, and he's been heating up the last couple of weeks, so I like Chase Brown. Rachaad White or Sean Tucker? I'm going to go with Sean Tucker this week, honestly. And the reason is I understand Rachaad White's going to get some more receiving work, but the Bills are very weak to the run game, and I think Sean Tucker will outrush Rachaad White, and he'll get enough points on the ground game to maybe outscore Rachaad White this week. If I trade Jettas, I have someone who wants RJ Harvey. He doesn't have any good RBs, but he has Quentin Johnson. Should I do RJ Harvey and for QJ to cover if letting Jettas go? I don't think it's worth getting rid of Jettas if you're getting RJ Harvey and QJ in return, man. Jettas has a great playoff schedule. He is a top 10 wide receiver upside. And RJ Harvey and QJ, neither one are really going to be consistent week to week, putting up anywhere near the amount of points as Justin Jefferson will be. Hurts or Herbert at QB? I'm going to go with Hurts this week, man. It's going to be a good game against the Lions, I think. It's going to be a lot of offense from both sides, and I think both Hurts and the Lions team both play well. But I like Herbert, but you can't bet against Hurts, especially with the touch push and the red zone volume that he gets. I've got to go with Hurts, but we are going to wrap it up here soon, guys. We do a few more minutes and maybe a couple more questions. But for those of you that are just jumping in and haven't already, make sure you download the Walter Picks app before we get into week 11 and use it to make your start set decisions and use it to help you prepare for the playoffs. It's got a start set tool where the projections are more accurate than ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo, and CBS. You'll get a better answer on who you should start and who you should leave on the bench than you will on the apps that you and I both play on. So definitely check that out for any start set tool or any start set decisions that you need help making. And if you're looking to upgrade your squad, buy any specific player, or sell any specific players, check out the new Trade Finder tool we got on there. It's got the same projections as the other tool, so it's got the more accurate projections. But the best part is it'll comb through your opponent's rosters for you to put together trades for you to offer to your league mates. So definitely check that out if you're getting to the point where you're ready to start prepping for the playoffs, which at this point should be everyone who is still in it. You should be prepping for the playoffs. Start Chase Brown this week. Absolutely start Chase Brown this week, man. He's got a good matchup against the Steelers. He averaged almost 10 yards per carry last time he played the Steelers, and he gets a lot of work in the receiving game. So I'm expecting a big week from Chase Brown. Devonta Smith or Mike Wilson in the flex? I like both this week, but I'm going with Devonta Smith. I think they're going to be passing the ball quite a bit, and I think that Devonta Smith has kind of taken over as the more reliable wide receiver, at least for fantasy, for that Eagles team. So I'm definitely going to go with Devonta Smith. So you do one last question here, and then we'll wrap it up, guys. Quentin Johnson, Michael Wilson, or Parker Washington? This week, I'm going with Parker Washington, man. He's been great the last 2 weeks, putting up 17 points and 18 points respectively. Travis Hunter's out for the year. BTJ's been dealing with an injury. So I think that he's going to continue to be one of Trevor Lawrence's most reliable targets, and he's going to be worth the start this week and probably a lot of weeks for the rest of the season. But we are going to wrap it up, guys. I appreciate you all tuning in and asking your start sit questions. We'll do more lives throughout the week. So if you have any more that didn't get answered, make sure to tune back in on Thursday. And if you don't already, follow me on TikTok at Saints.Walterpicks. But thank you all for tuning in and have a great night.